me say that I'm here to thank Indigenous youth for what you are doing and to say I support what you're doing. This is you shouldn't be surprised at the way that you are being portrayed or vilified, because you're engaged now in a battle that I believe this is the titanic battle over the future of this planet that is going to be fought over the next few years. We're going to determine which way we're going to take at this moment in time. I remember the battles over the forests in British Columbia in the 1970s and 80s, and we environmentalists were called greedy, we were called eco-terrorists, we were called enemies of this country. I mean, all of the names which are used to try to avoid dealing with the fundamental questions that are being raised. And I'm here to thank you, because you are forcing, I hope, our so-called leaders to confront this collision between two radically different ways of seeing the world. And I just came back yesterday from England. You'll have to excuse me in the time frame I'm at. It's now 4 o'clock in the morning, so I'm kind of, my brain is a little addled. But I spent time there with one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion. And what they are doing in many ways is similar to what you're doing here. They're using blockades. They paralyzed the capital of Britain, London, for months with their blockades and their unexpected tactics. But they have brought the issue of climate change to the absolute forefront. And this is what you're doing here. It's not just about pipelines. It's not just about climate change. It's about the way that we live on this planet. You see, fundamentally, people have known throughout the many tens of thousands of years, they lived in place. They understood that we live in a complex web of relationships. Relationships with other species of plants and animals, with the air, the water, the soil. That was the way that we lived. We understood that. That's called an ecocentric way of seeing the world. And I've been astounded over the last 40 years as my family has become involved with Indigenous groups to see that that ecocentric way of seeing our world is what makes you different and special and ties you to the land. I've been to so many funerals. I've been to so many celebrations and feasts and potlatches. And there the dances and the prayers and the songs all are giving thanks to the Creator for nature's generosity and abundance. And in giving thanks, acknowledging, as you did in your talk, a responsibility. There is a reciprocal obligation to do everything to keep it all going. But that is missing from the anthropocentric way of seeing the world. That is the way that was spread since the great explorers, age of exploration, 500 to 600 years ago. When Europeans discovered ways of sailing over great distances and going back, returning all the way home, they then began to search the planet for resources. And the indigenous people they found occupying these newly discovered lands were a pain in the ass, because they lived in a radically different way. They didn't want you to come in and just take what you wanted and stir up the earth and abuse the earth. And that is a collision that I believe that we're seeing coming now. That despite everything that's been done for the last 500 years of genocide, of colonization, of marginalization of the indigenous people, you've hung on to your culture and that sense of the meaning of the land. And the need for reciprocity is your message. You have a responsibility to care for the earth that has cared for you for so many thousands of years. That's what the battle is. I've gone to the blockade at the Unistoten over a year ago, and I've seen what the issue is. It's not about we've got to stop this pipeline. Frida and others have been there establishing a camp for over 5 years. They're trying to return to the values of living on the land. They're fighting for that land that will sustain them and that they have a responsibility to protect. That's what the dominant society does not want to face. And so they will use every terrible name they can to avoid confronting that. What I hope you are doing is making them meet with the indigenous leaders, with the traditional leaders of the Wet'suwet'en, and I hope in many other communities across this country, to see that in a time when even our parliament has declared we have a climate emergency, that we need to look at the world in a radically different way. You see, as we transform from an ecocentric to an anthropocentric way of seeing, we then created systems that reflected that anthropocentrism. Our laws are constructed under an anthropocentric. Oh yeah, it can certainly define property rights, it can define human rights, but do we think that the law, that human beings have the right to define everything for nature? What about the right of a river to flow as it has for millennia? What about the right of a songbird to live out its life as it evolved to do? What about the right of a forest to live as a community of organisms? Do you think that we have the right, and yet we think that we can regulate all of that with our anthropocentric laws? The game is tilted. If they want you to operate within the dominant society's laws, the game is already fixed. And then we construct a thing called the economy. That economic system is totally fixed. I got into a lot of trouble because I said conventional economics is a form of brain damage. That, I wish I'd thought of that on my own, but Hazel Henderson, a futurist in the States, told me that, and I just repeat it over and over again. Because economics is constructed on the basis of the creed of cancer. Economics is constructed on the notion of growth forever. That's what cancer cells think, that they can grow forever. Well, you know damn well they can't before they kill you. And we now think that progress in society is determined by economic growth. We believe it's possible, which it is not, and absolutely necessary to continue to progress. And in putting all of our faith in that crazy economic system, we never ask the important questions. What is an economy for? Are there no limits? How much is enough? Are we happier with all this stuff that we're getting out of that economic system? When Adam Smith was writing his Wealth of Nations, the Bible for modern economics, he talked about the invisible hand, which was the market. But you know, all the while he was writing that book, he was living at home with his mother. His mother was cooking for him. His mother was doing his clothes. His mother was doing all of the work that allowed him to sit at the table and write that book. The invisible hand is not the market. It's all of the women who are doing all of this work. That is not a part of this economic system that we all bow down before. And when you talk to economists and say, well, when you cut down that forest, you're going to lose all of the ability to take carbon out of the air and put oxygen back into it, that all of the green things are doing all the time. Do you know what economists say? Oh, well, that's a loss, but it's an externality to the economy. Because the economy is constructed on human creativity and human inventiveness. And what nature does to keep the planet habitable and healthy for us is disregarded by economists as irrelevant to our economic system. If there isn't anything better to define brain damage, I don't know. You'll have to tell me. Economics is totally disconnected from the world that keeps us alive. So it is inevitably destructive of the world around because the economic system is fixed. And then we construct to manage human activity and interaction. But politics runs on the basis, in our country at least, of a party system, and you all know what party obligation does. It suppresses any kind of dissent. If you don't like it, get the hell out of the party. Ask Jody Wilson-Raybould what party loyalty is all about and what it does. And when you become a politician, even the Greens, when they get in, what is your highest priority? It's getting re-elected, which means that anything, whatever you do during your occupation of that system has to pay off before the next election. In 1988, 300 climatologists, economists, experts met in Toronto. And the meeting was opened by Brian Mulroney, who was Prime Minister at the time, followed by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Norwegian Prime Minister who had just released the Brundtland Report, and followed by Jim Hansen, who had just testified in Congress that year that the heat waves they were suffering in the United States, he was 99% was sure was caused by human use of fossil fuels. And he left Congress to come to Toronto, and he electrified the audience by repeating his claims that global warming was happening and human beings were the cause. And that meeting called for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 15 years. If we had done it, we wouldn't have the crisis we have with climate today. Brian Mulroney set up a committee to see, can it be done? And if so, how much would it cost? And the committee report was, yes, we could do it, but it will cost over $70 billion. But if you achieve that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, we would make a net savings of over $100 billion. So you think, well, great, it's a no-brainer. That report has never been released. Because Brian Mulroney knew if he were to say, we've got to spend $70 billion right up front, right now, he would take such a shit-kicking before the next election that he wouldn't possibly get elected. And anyway, if he did that, someone else 15 years later would get to take credit for it. So it makes no political sense. If you listen to John Wilkinson, our new environment minister, when he came back from Madrid, the COP25 meeting, all he said was, we're committed to net zero by 2050. Committing to net zero by 2050 is no commitment at all. Not one of the politicians in office today will be in office in 2050. There is no accountability. You can make all kinds of promises for 2050 because you're not going to be around to say, oops, I didn't make it. So politics really is not set up to deal with these serious big issues that are going to take decades to try to resolve. And so what you are doing is demanding, I believe, that in confronting the issue over Wet'suwet'en territory, we're going to have to discuss the issues of our relationship with the land. And we're going to have to be guided by the people who are the only ones with a demonstrated track record of living sustainably in an area for thousands of years. That's the battle that you face, and it's a big one. It's a change fundamentally in how we see our place on this planet. So again, thank you. Congratulations for the amount of attention